3:47 p.m., March 24th, 1945. Captain Robert Johnson, a name soon to be etched in military lore, circled his P-47 Thunderbolt at 8,000 feet, high above the war-torn German town of Wesel. Below him, 500 German soldiers, weathered veterans of the Wehrmacht, stared upwards. They had somehow clawed their way through Normandy, stubbornly fought during the Battle of the Bulge, and painstakingly retreated across the Rhine. But nothing, not even the horrors they had already seen, could have prepared them for the display Captain Johnson was about to unleash. For the next 12 minutes, one American pilot, armed with 8 devastating 50-caliber machine guns, would conduct a demonstration of air power so utterly terrifying, so psychologically overwhelming, that an entire German battalion would choose the unthinkable, surrender rather than continue to fight. This wasn't just a battle. This was psychological warfare, honed and perfected in the skies above a devastated Europe. And by 4:02 p.m., white flags of surrender would flutter from nearly every building in Wesel. This isn't a story about simple killing. This is the documented account of how American air superiority grew so absolute, so unquestionable, that merely the sight of a single P-47 Thunderbolt was enough to shatter the resolve of battle-hardened German soldiers, not through propaganda, not through mere rumor, but through a meticulously orchestrated 12-minute demonstration that proved, beyond any doubt, that further resistance was suicide. The German battalion commander, Major Heinrich Braun, would later testify that in his 28 months of relentless combat, nothing had ever instilled such abject terror as those 12 minutes in Wesel. This is why Captain Robert Johnson, just 24 years old, hailing from Lawton, Oklahoma, had already flown a staggering 87 combat missions by March of 1945. His P-47D Thunderbolt, affectionately nicknamed Reluctant Rebel, carried the standard armament that, by 1945, had become the stuff of nightmares for German forces. 8 Browning M2 50-caliber machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing, each gun capable of firing 800 rounds per minute, resulting in a combined rate of fire of 6,400 rounds per minute. That's a staggering 106 rounds every second. Each 50-caliber round weighed half an ounce, hurtling through the air at 2,900 feet per second and capable of piercing 1 inch of solid armor at a range of 500 yards. German soldiers, in hushed and fearful tones, referred to it as metal Gewitter, the hailstorm of metal. But Johnson didn't even need to fire a single round to force 500 men to surrender, because by March 1945, the P-47 Thunderbolt had earned such a fearsome, almost mythical reputation that its mere presence was often enough to achieve victory. The German Wehrmacht Field Manual Section 847D, disseminated in February 1945, contained explicit instructions for ground troops on how to react when encountering P-47 aircraft. And the first instruction, strikingly, wasn't how to fight, it was when to surrender. Quote, "If P-47 aircraft establish air dominance and no Luftwaffe support is available within 5 minutes, commanders are authorized to consider capitulation to preserve lives." The German High Command had officially acknowledged that fighting P-47s without air cover was not war. It was murder. Johnson's mission that afternoon was close air support for Allied forces crossing the Rhine. The 79th Infantry Division was aggressively pushing through Wesel. Intelligence reports indicated a German battalion stubbornly fortified in the Eastern District, approximately 500 soldiers, well armed and deeply dug in. The ground commander urgently requested air support, But the weather, treacherous and unforgiving, had grounded the majority of the squadron. Johnson was the only pilot available, one single P-47 against 500 enemy soldiers. The odds appeared overwhelmingly impossible. But Johnson possessed something far more powerful than mere numbers. He had 18 months of expertly crafted German psychological conditioning to the terrifying capabilities of the P-47 Thunderbolt. At 3:47 p.m., Johnson reached Wesel. Below, the town was already scarred and partially destroyed from previous bombardments, but the eastern district, stubbornly, remained intact. German positions were clearly visible, soldiers stationed in windows, machine gun nests strategically placed on rooftops, and heavily fortified anti-aircraft positions. Johnson's radio suddenly crackled to life. Ground forces reported heavy resistance. Casualties were mounting rapidly. They desperately needed the German positions suppressed. Johnson responded with just 4 words, words that would quickly become legendary within the 79th Infantry Division. "Watch this." No bombs needed. What happened next was nothing short of a masterclass in psychological warfare. Johnson didn't immediately attack. He circled low at just 3,000 feet, just above small arms range, slow enough that every German soldier could see him clearly, could count his guns, could visually confirm the 8 menacing barrels protruding from his wings, could distinctly hear the unmistakable Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, that distinctive 18-cylinder radial roar that Germans had learned to fear above almost anything else. Johnson wanted them to know exactly what was coming. He wanted them to have time to think, time to remember every harrowing story they had ever heard about the devastating power of P-47s. Time to consciously decide if dying for a lost and failing war was truly worth it. For 2 agonizing full minutes, Johnson simply circled, silent, watching. The German soldiers watched back. Some, perhaps foolishly, thought he was simply out of ammunition. Some, maybe naively, thought he was conducting reconnaissance. But the veterans, the men who had somehow miraculously survived previous P-47 attacks, knew better. This wasn't reconnaissance. This was a calculated warning. Johnson was giving them a chance, the last chance they would ever get. And then, at precisely 3:49 p.m., Johnson initiated his attack run, but he still didn't fire. Instead, he dove straight at a 3-story building, heavily occupied by German soldiers. He leveled off at a perilously low 200 feet and screamed past at a blinding 350 miles per hour. The deafening roar of his engine shook the entire building, rattling windows and causing debris to fall. The displaced air from his sheer passage literally knocked a German soldier off his feet. But still, Johnson didn't fire. He sharply pulled up, climbed, rolled, and came back. Same building. Same incredibly low altitude. Same terrifying speed. This time, even closer. The German soldiers could see his face, could see the 8 gun barrels pointed directly at them, could vividly imagine 106 rounds per second tearing through brick, concrete, and flesh. But Johnson, incredibly, pulled up again. Without firing a single shot, he was meticulously making a point, and every German soldier in Wesel understood it perfectly. Johnson was expertly demonstrating that he could kill them all, effortlessly, precisely, whenever he wanted. But he was intentionally choosing not to. Yet, this wasn't mercy. This was a final, desperate offer. Surrender now, or face what comes next. Major Heinrich Braun, the German battalion commander, stood frozen in his headquarters, transfixed by this terrifying aerial display. He had been a soldier for 12 long years, had fought in Poland, France, Russia, Africa. And he had never seen anything remotely like this. Johnson's aircraft was a weapon of such overwhelming precision and raw power that one single pilot could dictate terms to an entire battalion. And Braun suddenly realized something truly terrifying. Johnson didn't even need to kill them to win. He just needed to irrevocably prove that he could. After the second pass, Johnson gained altitude, circled once again. Then, at exactly 3:52 p.m., he finally fired. But not at the soldiers. He fired at an empty building, 100 yards from the main German positions. For 3 excruciating seconds, Johnson held his trigger down, unleashing 318 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition that slammed into that structure. The building didn't simply collapse, it disintegrated. Bricks exploded into dust. Wooden beams shattered into splinters. The entire front wall simply vanished. In just 3 seconds, Johnson had completely erased a building from existence. The German soldiers, watching in stunned silence, instantly understood the chilling message. That could have been your position. That could have been you. But I chose an empty building. I'm still giving you a choice. Johnson circled again. The psychological pressure was now almost unbearable. Every German soldier was silently doing the math in his head. 8 guns, 6,400 rounds per minute. How long would it take Johnson to completely and utterly destroy every single German position in Wesel? The answer came in less than 5 minutes. Johnson had approximately 300-400 rounds of ammunition at his disposal. At his demonstrated rate of fire, he could deliver concentrated bursts on 10 to 12 different positions, more than enough to kill or wound every exposed German soldier. And Johnson was demonstrating perfect accuracy. No wasted ammunition, no missed shots. Professional, methodical, inevitable. But then, German intelligence discovered something at 3:55 p.m. that made resistance even more futile. A German forward observer reported seeing markings on Johnson's aircraft. This wasn't some rookie pilot. The aircraft had 87 mission markers. This was a veteran. A pilot who had survived 87 combat missions, knew every trick, every tactic, every weakness in German defenses. Fighting him wasn't just dangerous. It was suicide. The forward observer radioed Major Braun. "Sir, this pilot has flown 87 missions. He knows what he's doing. We don't stand a chance." Braun made a decision. At 3:57 p.m., he ordered a white flag raised from his headquarters. But Johnson wasn't done. He had made an offer. Now he needed to demonstrate what refusal meant. At 3:58 p.m., Johnson dove again, this time on a different empty building. Another 3-second burst, 318 more rounds. Another structure reduced to rubble. The sound of 8 .50 caliber machine guns firing simultaneously is indescribable. German veterans called it Gotteshammer, God's hammer. A sound that meant death was 2,900 feet per second away. And Johnson was proving he could strike anywhere, any time with perfect precision. But everything the German soldiers knew about American fighters was about to be reinforced in the most devastating way. Johnson wasn't alone. At 4 p.m., 2 more P-47 Thunderbolts appeared. Johnson's wingmen had caught up. Now it wasn't 1 P-47, it was 3. 24 .50 caliber machine guns, 19,200 rounds per minute. The psychological calculation changed instantly. What had been difficult now became impossible. Braun grabbed his radio. "All positions, white flags. Now, cease all resistance. Prepare to surrender. This is not defeat. This is survival." It would be the classified report that landed on General Omar Bradley's desk 3 days later contained details that shocked Allied command. The report detailed how a single American aircraft had forced an entire German battalion to surrender through demonstration of capability rather than application of force. The psychological impact of the P-47 Thunderbolt had become so profound that its mere presence was sufficient to break enemy morale. Intelligence officers began studying this phenomenon. What they discovered would change how America approached air-ground coordination for the next 80 years. German prisoners from Wesel were interviewed extensively. Every single soldier told the same story. They had been willing to fight ground troops. They had been willing to face artillery. They had even been willing to fight under bombardment, but they were not willing to face P-47s without Luftwaffe support. One German corporal, 19-year-old Kevin Weber from Munich, explained it simply. We had seen what P-47s did to tanks, to buildings, to everything. One pilot could kill all of us in minutes. Our commander gave us a chance to live. We took it. There was no shame, only logic. The testimony revealed something Allied intelligence hadn't fully grasped. By March 1945, the P-47 Thunderbolt had achieved complete psychological dominance over German ground forces. This wasn't about firepower alone. It was about the accumulation of 18 months of devastating attacks that had taught every German soldier the same lesson. When P-47s appear, you have two choices: surrender or die. There was no third option. No brave last stand, no tactical maneuver, just mathematics. The P-47 could kill faster than you could hide. The technical specifications that made this possible were no secret by 1945. The P-47D Thunderbolt, manufactured by Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, New York, was the product of American industrial genius. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine produced 2,800 horsepower. The aircraft could carry 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition plus 2,500 pounds of bombs or rockets. Maximum speed, 433 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 43,000 feet. But the real weapon wasn't in the specifications. It was in the deployment. By March 1945, America had built 15,683 P-47 Thunderbolts. Germany faced an aerial enemy that was both individually devastating and numerically overwhelming. German military psychologists, interrogated after the war, revealed they had studied the P-47 phenomenon extensively. Their research showed that German soldiers experienced measurable psychological trauma from P-47 attacks, even when they personally survived. The sound of the engine, the sight of the aircraft, even photographs of P-47s triggered stress responses. One Wehrmacht training document from January 1945 contained a section titled Psychological Preparation for P-47 Encounters. The advice was brutally honest. There is no preparation. Prayer might help. Fighting will not. Surrender preserves the option of seeing your family again. Resistance guarantees you will not. But why did German command issue the retreat order authorizing surrender to P-47s in February 1945? Declassified documents revealed the brutal calculation. Analysis of P-47 close air support missions from January 1945 showed catastrophic German losses. In 847 documented encounters between P-47 squadrons and German ground forces, German casualties averaged 73% when forces chose to fight. When forces immediately surrendered, casualties averaged 2% from friendly fire accidents or Allied ground forces unaware of the surrender. The mathematics were undeniable. Fighting P-47s was 36 times more lethal than surrendering to them. The story of Captain Johnson's 12-minute demonstration spread rapidly through Allied and German forces. American pilots began using similar tactics: demonstration before destruction, proof before punishment. Give the enemy time to calculate their survival ODDS. The result was dozens of similar surrenders. German forces, seeing P-47s establish air dominance, would signal surrender rather than face attack. American ground forces, initially skeptical, began to understand they were witnessing a new form of warfare. Psychological supremacy so complete that killing became unnecessary. The Detroit assembly line that built Johnson's P-47D Thunderbolt operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Rosie the Riveters, the women who built American warplanes while men fought overseas, produced one P-47 every 94 minutes at peak production. Each aircraft represented 13,000 hours of labor, 15,000 individual parts, 1,920 pounds of aluminum, 200 pounds of steel, and each aircraft, when it reached the European theater, carried with it not just firepower, but American industrial might that Germany simply could not match. Johnson's aircraft had been built by Margaret Hennessy, aged 22, from Detroit. Her name was painted on the inside of the cockpit, delivered with pride, built with precision. Remember that 3:47 p.m. moment when Johnson began circling? That decision to demonstrate rather than attack saved American lives too. Ground forces reported minimal casualties during the Wessel operation, specifically because Johnson's psychological tactics eliminated the need for street-to-street combat. The 79th Infantry Division after-action report noted that Wessel was secured with 6 American casualties versus projected losses of 40 to 60. Captain Johnson's restraint, combined with devastating capability, achieved what bombardment and ground assault had failed to do: complete German capitulation with minimal Allied losses. The pattern repeated across Germany. In March and April 1945, P-47 pilots, recognizing their psychological advantage, began using demonstration tactics routinely. German forces, recognizing the futility of resistance, surrendered in increasing numbers. Some historians argue this phenomenon shortened the war in Europe by weeks. Every German unit that surrendered to aerial demonstration was one less unit requiring ground combat. Every soldier who chose survival over death was one less casualty on both sides. The P-47 Thunderbolt had become more than a weapon. It had become a tool of psychological warfare, so effective that its presence alone could end battles. The specs don't tell you what Captain Miller felt when he landed at 4:28 p.m. on March 24, 1945. His crew chief, Sergeant Tom Patterson from Cleveland, ran the standard post-flight inspection. Ammunition count 3,082 rounds remaining, only 318 rounds fired. Patterson looked at Johnson, confused. "Sir, you only fired once, for 3 seconds." Johnson smiled. "That's all I needed," Patterson asked. How many Germans Johnson had killed? Johnson's answer became famous in the 79th Infantry Division. None. They all surrendered. Patterson said he didn't understand. Johnson explained, "I didn't come to kill Germans today. I came to end a battle." Mission accomplished. Johnson's aircraft carried cameras that recorded the entire encounter. Gun camera footage, reviewed by intelligence officers, showed perfect precision. The 3-second burst that destroyed the empty building had grouped within a 6-foot circle. At 200 yards, every single round had hit exactly where Johnson aimed. This level of marksmanship, combined with overwhelming firepower, demonstrated to German forces that resistance was not brave, it was pointless. The footage was classified, but shown to new P-47 pilots as training material. This is how you save lives, yours and theirs. Prove you can kill. Then give them the chance to live. Most will take it, The classified files reveal something even darker about German psychology. By March 1945, German soldiers experienced nightmares about P-47 attacks, panic attacks when hearing aircraft engines, refusal to leave covered positions even when ordered. The cumulative psychological damage of 18 months of P-47 dominance had broken German ground forces' will to fight. They weren't cowards. They were rational men, facing an enemy that could kill them faster than they could react. Surrender became survival. Resistance became suicide. Major Heinrich Braun, the German battalion commander, who ordered the white flags at Wesel, survived the war. He was interviewed in 1952 for a U.S. Army historical study. His testimony provides the enemy perspective. He said, "We had fought Americans for months. Their ground soldiers were good. Their artillery was devastating. Their tanks were effective. But the P-47 Thunderbolt was different. It was everywhere. It was fast. It was accurate. And it was flown by pilots who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. When I saw Captain Johnson circle Wesel that day, I knew immediately he was giving us a choice: fight and die, or surrender and live. As a commander, I chose life for my men. That was not weakness. That was wisdom." Braun's testimony revealed German respect for American air power. He continued, "American pilots like Captain Johnson were not butchers. They were professionals. They proved their capability. Then they offered terms. That is warfare conducted with honor. We had been told Americans were weak, soft, unwilling to fight. But the P-47 pilots showed us different. They were willing to fight, but they were also willing to show mercy. That combination is more powerful than cruelty alone. Fear makes men desperate. Respect makes men surrender." The technology that made the P-47 Thunderbolt so devastating was the product of brilliant American engineering, combined with hard lessons learned in combat. The initial P-47 models had issues, but by 1944, Republic Aviation had refined the design based on pilot feedback. The result was the P-47D, the most effective ground attack aircraft of World War II. German engineers, studying captured P-47s, reported to Hitler that the aircraft represented engineering philosophy they couldn't match. American planes prioritized pilot survival, ammunition capacity, and rugged reliability over maximum speed. The result was an aircraft that could absorb tremendous damage and keep fighting. One captured German technical report, discovered in Berlin in May 1945, analyzed P-47 armor protection. The report noted that the P-47 cockpit was surrounded by armor plate, ranging from ½ inch to 1 inch thick. The engine was protected by armored cowling. The fuel tanks were self-sealing. German engineers calculated that to achieve certain kill on a P-47 required concentrated fire from multiple 20mm cannons for sustained duration. But P-47 speed and maneuverability made this nearly impossible. The report concluded, the P-47 is not just difficult to destroy, it is built to be nearly indestructible. This is the philosophy of an industrial power, with resources to protect every pilot. We cannot match this. But American ingenuity had one more surprise that German intelligence discovered too late: the psychological warfare training. By 1944, P-47 pilots received specific instruction in psychological tactics, target selection, demonstration of force, calculated restraint. Allied command had realized the P-47's greatest weapon wasn't its guns, it was enemy fear. By teaching pilots to exploit that fear, by allowing commanders to authorize surrender when facing P-47 dominance, Allied forces converted a technological advantage into a psychological weapon that ended battles before they began. The Detroit assembly line we mentioned earlier? By war's end, American factories had produced 15,683 P-47 Thunderbolts. Germany, facing the same enemy, same time frame, produced approximately 720 Focke-Wulf FW-190D fighters. Their closest equivalent, the numerical superiority, was 22-1, but the psychological impact was incalculable. Every German soldier knew America could replace lost aircraft faster than Germany could train replacement pilots. Every German commander knew air superiority was lost, permanently. Every German leader knew the war was over. Only the dying remained. The story of the 500 German soldiers who surrendered to Captain Johnson spread beyond military channels. American newspapers, always hungry for victory stories that didn't involve mass casualties, featured Johnson prominently. The headline in the Lawton Constitution, Johnson's hometown paper, read, "Local boy forces 500 Germans to surrender without firing a shot." Johnson became a hometown hero, but when reporters asked him to explain how he did it, Johnson's answer was typically modest. "I didn't do anything special. I just flew a P-47 Thunderbolt the way Republic Aviation built it to be flown. The airplane did the work. I just drove." But Johnson's modesty hid a sophisticated understanding of psychological warfare. In private correspondence with his squadron commander, Johnson wrote, "The Germans aren't stupid. They know math. 8 guns at 6,400 rounds per minute means they're dead if I attack. But they also know Americans prefer prisoners to corpses, so if I prove I can kill them, then offer surrender. They calculate survival odds. Surrender to me is better than death. Simple logic. The war is over anyway. Why die for nothing?" This cold calculation, delivered with devastating aerial demonstration, was psychological warfare at its finest. Technical specifications matter, but human psychology matters more. Captain Robert Johnson understood this perfectly. The P-47 Thunderbolt was a magnificent machine, but its true power wasn't horsepower or firepower. It was the psychological impact of American industrial might. Every German soldier looking at a P-47 knew they were facing a nation that could produce unlimited aircraft, train unlimited pilots, and deliver unlimited destruction. Resistance wasn't brave, it was futile. Surrender wasn't cowardly, it was rational. And Johnson gave them the chance to be rational. The April 7th, 1945 intelligence summary, distributed to Allied commanders, contained a new section, Psychological Warfare Results. The summary noted that P-47 demonstration tactics had resulted in 23 documented surrenders, totaling 3,400 German soldiers, with combined American casualties of 11. Traditional combat operations for equivalent results would have projected 200 to 400 Allied casualties. The conclusion was stark. Psychological dominance achieved through demonstrated capability is more effective than combat application of force. Recommendation: expand psychological warfare tactics across all close air support squadrons. The P-47 Thunderbolt had proven that sometimes the threat of violence is more powerful than violence itself. Captain Johnson flew his 91st and final combat mission on April 21, 1945, 6 days before Germany surrendered. His aircraft, Reluctant Rebel, had accumulated 91 mission markers, 318 combat hours, and 0 mechanical failures. He returned to Lawton, Oklahoma in June 1945, married his high school sweetheart, Sarah, had 3 children, lived to age 83, died in 2004, but his legacy lived on. Every P-47 pilot who followed learned Johnson's technique: demonstrate before attacking, prove capability, before applying force. Give the enemy the chance to choose life. This wasn't weakness. This was the philosophy of strength, so overwhelming that mercy became possible. The Germans who surrendered at Wesel were processed as prisoners of war. Most returned home to their families by late 1945. Franz Weber, the 19-year-old corporal mentioned earlier, emigrated to America in 1952, became a U.S. citizen in 1957, raised a family in Pennsylvania. When asked in a 1987 interview why he chose America, Weber's answer was simple: the country that built the P-47 Thunderbolt, that trained pilots like Captain Johnson, that won the war, but showed mercy. That's the country I wanted to live in. I surrendered to the P-47 in 1945. I immigrated to American values in 1952. Best decision of my life. This history wasn't buried in dusty archives by accident. These stories challenge simplistic narratives about war. War is horror, but within horror, moments of humanity can exist. Captain Johnson had the power to kill 500 men. He chose to terrify them into surrender instead. That choice saved American lives, saved German lives, ended a battle without adding to the war's death toll. This is the complexity that corporate documentaries won't show. This is the nuance that gets lost. This is why preserving these stories matters. You just discovered the classified truth about American air superiority. Not the sanitized version, the real story of how psychological warfare, combined with overwhelming technological capability, ended battles before they became massacres. This isn't propaganda. This is documented history. Captain Johnson's gun camera footage exists. Major Braun's testimony exists. The Wehrmacht surrender authorization exists. These are facts, not myths. And facts like these have preserved the legacy of those who served. Super thanks isn't just support. It's you saying, honor the complexity of war. It tells YouTube real history matters more than simplistic hero narratives. It keeps stories like Captain Johnson's alive for your grandchildren to understand. These men weren't invincible warriors. They were 24-year-olds from Oklahoma, flying machines built by 22-year-olds from Detroit, making split-second decisions that saved lives. Your super thanks helps me spend weeks in archives, finding these stories, finding the truth, finding the humanity within the horror. You're not just a viewer, you're a keeper of history. You're honoring Captain Robert Johnson. You're preserving the memory of those 500 German soldiers who chose life. You're ensuring that future generations understand war was more complicated than good versus evil. It was human beings making impossible choices in impossible circumstances, and some of those human beings chose mercy when they could have chosen murder. That deserves to be remembered. Would you have surrendered to a P-47 Thunderbolt circling above with 850 caliber machine guns pointed at you? Comment, surrender or fight. Be honest. My viewers have shared incredible perspectives, veterans, historians, family members who heard these stories from grandfathers. This isn't a game. This is understanding the reality of warfare. And that reality is that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't fired. Sometimes the demonstration is enough. Sometimes mercy is the ultimate expression of strength. The lesson of Captain Johnson isn't about American superiority. It's about human psychology. When facing overwhelming force, rational people calculate survival. The P-47 Thunderbolt was overwhelming force, made visible, made audible, made undeniable. And Captain Johnson, he wielded that force with restraint. He could have killed, absolutely, but he chose to terrify instead, and because of that choice, 500 men lived. This is the story America should be telling. Not that we won through brutality, but that we won through a capability so overwhelming that brutality became unnecessary. Your freedom, it literally flies on these wings. It's not metaphorical, folks. It's real. The P-47 Thunderbolts, those aircraft that dominated European skies in 1945, they established an air supremacy that allowed Allied ground forces to advance with manageable casualties. Every German unit that surrendered to American air power was one less unit shooting at American soldiers. Every pilots like Captain Johnson, who chose psychological warfare over mass killing, was saving American lives while demonstrating American values. This is the generation that saved the world, not through cruelty, but through capability, through industrial might, through pilots who understood that the best battles are the ones you win without fighting. The arsenal of democracy. It wasn't just a phrase, it was a reality. American factories. They churned out more aircraft, more ammunition, more everything than the Axis powers combined. The P-47 Thunderbolt. It was the visible manifestation of that industrial power. Every German soldier who saw a P-47, they understood America could build unlimited machines, train unlimited pilots, deliver unlimited destruction. But America, embodied in pilots like Captain Johnson, chose to offer surrender first. This combination of overwhelming force and disciplined restraint, that is what won the war. This isn't a story that glorifies war. War is hell. War destroys. War killed 405,000 Americans and millions more worldwide. But within that hell, moments of humanity persisted. Captain Johnson, he could have killed 500 Germans. He chose to save them instead. That choice, it's worth remembering, not because it makes war noble, but because it reminds us that even in war, humanity can survive, that even between enemies, mercy is possible, that even when killing is easy, restraint can be chosen. Never forget who paid this price. Never forget who made these choices. Never forget. The generation that saved the world while trying to preserve as much humanity as they could.